Welcome to the Mike and Doug Show. I'm Doug. Hi, Mike.
Hi, Doug. How are you this Friday?
Well, I'm excited because we have a guest star. Matter of fact, she's the brightest star in our firmament.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I'm back here working the production end, and you guys are always the star of our show. And let me tell you what we're going to do today, folks, because some of you may just go, oh my gosh, they're going in the weeds, but this is very important. In the first segment of the show, Douglas is going to explain to you a summary that he has done from a book, several research pieces that he's put together about the criminal activity involved in the genocide operation that we're all experiencing. So that's really good. And then Michael has been doing some research on a subject that's near and dear to me, and that is silver rigging. Now, Michael has some historic information that you're going to want to hear, because you might not think history is important, but it's so important because the things that we're experiencing today in this genocide, this global genocide, actually began way back when. And that's why it's important to listen to what Mike has to say. So without further ado, Douglas, can you jump in and tell us what your findings were this week?
Yes, we had posted on Gab a very good article by Dr. Richard Fleming, who did a talk. And when I heard him, I said, wow, this guy is the person we need, because he is nailing it. And he's saying what we knew from the beginning, the first moments that this pandemic was brought out into the public. We said, well, this has been going on since 2000. This has been going on for 21 years. Why are people surprised? Matter of fact, they called her crazy bat doctor. And I've been following the research since back then, because she was creating synthetic viruses that kill people, and there could be no other reason to do that except to kill people. So when I heard Dr. Richard Fleming, at the end of his talk, he mentions that he did a book, and his book is called Is COVID-19 a Bioweapon? A Scientific and Forensic Investigation. I highly recommend this book. What I did was went in and did my normal way of summarizing and condensing what he said so that it can be put in an article, 4 or 5 page article, so people can get the salient factors, so that they can understand that all that needs to happen is hand this book to an honest judge. And that may be an oxymoron in America at this point to say an honest judge. But if an honest federal judge simply read this book, they wouldn't even need to take Fauci and Birx and the rest of them, Ralph Barrick. They wouldn't need to take them to court. They should put them straight in jail. Why? Because it is very obvious by all the laws that bioweapon research is illegal. And anytime you say gain of function or a chimeric virus, you are talking about gain of function, which is illegal. Now, what Fleming has done in his book is he's taken all of the documents, which I wasn't really able to find them, the exact grants from the exact federal agencies here in America, and this is almost focused on the American crime, the U.S. crime here, and who was involved. And these agencies, of course, are the standard culprits, the usual suspects, the National Institutes of Health, and then the Institute for Allergy and Infection that Fauci runs. Dr. Deborah Birx over there at CDC. Of course, James Redfield, Dr. Ralph Barrick, who everybody's heard about now because of Senator Rand Paul going after Fauci and Fauci lying 20 times in a row, and then at the end telling the truth, partial truth, 5 times in a row, that yes, there is gain of function going on with Dr. Ralph Barrick at the Carolina Vaccine Institute at the University of North Carolina. Then crazy bat doctor, Dr. Shi Zhengli Li at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which were the big focuses, but then also the EcoHealth Alliance, which is run by Peter Daszak, who Dr. Fleming points out is really one of the biggest culprits involved, and also Colonel David Franz, the deputy commander at Fort Detrick, where that's the U.S. Biological Weapons Division. These criminals, and this is just a short list of criminals, he proves beyond a shadow of a doubt. He gives the indictable evidence, and that's what Michael and the miners love. If you don't have indictable evidence, they really, it's all just sheer poppycock and conspiracy until then. But this shows you that from 2000, the year 2000, even a little bit before, they were doing this on purpose, crossing animal DNA with human to make gain of function viruses that also included the HIV/AIDS virus. It included all kinds of viruses, and the evidence is there, the grant numbers are there, the research is there, and the very papers that I have been yelling about since we heard about the pandemic are there, and they're quoted, and this
Hey,
book,
Douglas.
of course, is the source of it.
Can you explain gain of function?
Well, it means that you take something that's bad like influenza, and then you add 5 or 6 other influenzas to it. So you gain the function of that particular virus.
So you mean at the molecular level, these viruses contain other viruses inside them?
Yes. And in this case, we know from the genomic studies that have been done on the partial aspects of the virus, because the COVID-19 virus has not been isolated and it has not had a full genome decoding. But the part that we have decoded that was done in Shanghai.
Hang on, why hasn't that been done? It seems like that would be the first thing to do.
Because that's the smoking gun that will put all the people in jail, showing definitively that it's a man-made, laboratory-made synthetic virus that has been manipulated and sliced. The other genes have been sliced into this DNA of this virus, and they then are basically making a bioweapon. Well,
so you're telling me that the most obvious thing to do first has never been done. We've never actually, nobody's ever shown the contents of what is supposedly a coronavirus.
It is next to illegal to do an autopsy on someone who supposedly died of COVID-19. There's only one that I've seen where a doctor did it against the regulations and against the mandates and proved that this virus, this man-made virus, the synthetic virus, was in every tissue in that person's body. And now, but they did not do basically a true isolation, because the isolation process includes adding all kinds of animal viruses, animal substances. You can't even believe it. So that in the end, anything that they're telling you about the way that they've analyzed this, whether it be the different variants, D or Lambda or any of the other Mu variants, that's all nonsense. Now, there are laws concerning gain of function research.
Can I ask another question?
Mm-hmm.
So when you say all those variants, are those variants the gain of function that we're talking about here? So they put the variants of that coronavirus in there or other viruses? What are we talking about when we talk about the Delta?
The Delta is, again, a specifically targeted bioweapon that takes not variants, but mutations, and these are man-made mutations. And so when they're saying they have the variant, first off, no one can test for it. The PCR tests for it don't arrive at anything. And to say that there's a Delta virus is nonsense. The Delta virus right now is just a smokescreen for the fact that when you get the jab, you get prion illness. So the Delta variant is really what is called spongiform encephalitis or encephalitis.
Encephalitis,
yeah.
Isn't it?
Well,
That's mad cow disease?
That's the way that we lay people would say it, yes. That's mad cow disease, and now it's mad human disease. And the prion illness is an illness that goes beyond the blood-brain barrier on purpose because it was mutated to do so, and it then lodges in the caudate and in the striatum of the midbrain, which then gives you what looks to be Alzheimer's. As a matter of fact, they took Alzheimer's and put it into this man-made synthetic virus. Let's look at the laws concerning gain-of-function research. This law, United States Federal Code 12, USC Chapter 10-175, expressly prohibits such biological weapons and makes it a criminal offense, and it reads this way, 175, quote, prohibitions with respect to biological weapons. A, in general, whoever knowingly develops, produces, stockpiles, transfers, acquires, retains, or possesses any biological agent, toxin, or delivery system for use as a weapon, or knowingly assists a foreign state or any organization to do so, or attempts, threatens, or conspires to do the same, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned for life or any other term of years or both. It should be treason and basically a weapon of mass destruction and mass murderers, and they should receive much worse punishment than life in prison. And that means that every pharmaceutical company that is supposedly producing this supposed vaccine, which I call a fake vaccine because it is not a vaccine, it is a viral vector, a man-made synthetic viral vector that has been mutated and then had terrible illnesses, everything from influenza to HIV to smallpox, you name it. There's a whole list have been spliced into this, into the genes of this DNA virus. Now, there are other provisions for prosecution of bioweapons makers and producers and conspirators, and that's the Biological Weapons Convention Treaty of 1969, signed and ratified in 1972, and you cannot develop, acquire, retain, produce any biological agent or toxin that has no justification for prevention or peaceful purposes. In other words, even if they told you, oh, we're doing this because China developed this horrible, horrible vaccine and we have to have countermeasures, wrong. It is illegal.
Right. You mentioned when you were reading that, one of the categories was a conspirator with these people.
Yes.
Do you recall that one of the whistleblowers from the Highlands group was at a meeting where they specifically weaponized technology. This person was at that meeting. Anthony Fauci came in, sat in front of her, and she overheard them talking with the organizers, including Professor Chandler, our future patent attorney at the time. And specifically, they were talking about weaponizing viruses. She overheard that at this meeting. So that means all those people in that meeting that were organizing the Highlands group are all guilty of what you're referring to here.
And you have an affidavit from her.
There is an affidavit, yes.
There, and that she witnessed that. And then after the meeting, as she told us on the phone, that Fauci was trying to get them all to take the influenza shot.
Right. And she said they even had takers at that meeting, which is really crazy.
Let me just...
But this has been a carefully planned war. Let me get my face in here. A carefully planned war to take over America and the world. And the planning that has gone into place here happened long before the three of us were born. So even though you're saying that all this is illegal and yet you have proof that it has been done, our courts have been captured by the enemy. Our administrative offices through senior executive service have been captured. So what do? We have to think strategically. We have to think warlike. We have been attacked and we are now locked down and unable to do anything with our current system. So how does this unfold? How do we win?
There's a meme that's circulating right now, which I think is brilliant. And it says specifically that it encourages people who are technology people inside these pharmaceutical companies, technology companies, communications companies, if they are a part of or asked to do illegal acts, according to the document that Douglas just read, it's encouraging those technologists to essentially sabotage those operations.
And they should. This is war.
That's the only way that can happen, because only the insiders are going to know how to do that.
And that's what they can do to help us win the war. It's not about guns and going out in the street and protesting. I saw that meme. And I think it's important. If you're in the field of technology, you're awake to what's going on. What can you do to throw a wrench into the works?
Right.
Now, the Nuremberg Code of 1947 states that you cannot do scientific experimentation on humans without informed consent, absence of coercion, and properly formulated scientific experimentations, and it demands that it has to be for beneficent reasons. Well, this is not for anyone's benefit. This is to kill. Then there's the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights of 1976, which also provide for all kinds of the same rights as we've just mentioned the others. And then in October of 2014, the United States government issued a policy statement regarding gain-of-function research, including the following restrictions. And I'll tell you why in a minute that they had to do this. Quote, new funding or new U.S. government funding will not be released for gain-of-function research projects that may be reasonably anticipated to confer attributes of influenza, MERS, or SARS, and that's what COVID is SARS, viruses such that the virus would have enhanced pathogenicity and or transmissibility in mammals via the respiratory route. And that's what this is. This is how you supposedly get it, is the respiratory route. Now, why did they have to do that? That's because in 2013, well, I'll just read this. In October of 2014, only 1 year after lifting the moratorium, the Obama administration placed a ban on gain-of-function research after it was discovered that the CDC had accidentally exposed workers to anthrax, which is deadly, and unwittingly shipped out samples of influenza virus contaminated with the deadly H5N1 virus, the most deadly influenza known in history. Well, what happened before that in 2013 was they found out that this research was going on. So what did they do? They put a moratorium on it for 1 year. No one did anything. Nothing came forward. The public wasn't told about this, and we show you in this article that is from Richard Fleming's book, that from 2000 on, the very things that I've been screaming about since day one of the pandemic, as I've said, is that research. So when the research was found out, they put a silly little excuse for some type of federal action to create a moratorium. When that moratorium was up, what did they find out? That the CDC was making anthrax as a poison, and that they contaminated the yearly flu shot, the one that they offer on every street corner in the drugstores, was contaminated with the most deadly influenza of all times. Now, folks, if you don't know this, it may come as a shock to you, but the influenza shot you get from the government and the pharmacy companies, it's on every street corner in America. Matter of fact, they'll offer them for free. They can have 5 or 6 different strains of influenza, but they do not have the influenza strain that you would be getting that year, because that's a new strain and they haven't been able to add it to the supposed vaccine mix. Now, these vaccines have all kinds of other horrible things mixed into them, but the point is there are laws that prohibit gain of function. There are laws that prohibit any kind of actions that don't provide informed consent or any kind of nefarious experimentation on humans. Plenty of laws, but can we find a federal agency to prosecute this? No. Why? Because as Fleming points out, the National Institute of Health, the CDC, the FDA, the Department of Health and Human Services, the CIA, the Department of Defense, Department of Agriculture, on and on. There are about 20 agencies, federal agencies, that are all part of creating these bioweapons. And it is completely illegal in this country, and it is life imprisonment for even being part of a conspiracy, even handling it, even having it in your possession is a life sentence. So get this book, or our article.
Can I see the cover?
Yes, since we are now on
There
video.
we go.
Since we have in the program notes, you'll find the truncated Reader's Digest condensed version of it. But if you get the book, you'll find all the evidence, in case you don't believe what I'm saying here, showing every grant, who gave it, who received it, when it happened, what the amount was. And this is also conspiracy with China, because we paid China to be part of this research. The Wuhan lab was paid by the National Institute of Health, particularly Anthony Fauci, to do this research in a P4 lab, and the whole nonsense that it started in the market next to the Wuhan lab is complete nonsense. This was a bioweapon from the beginning.
But all of these agencies have been seized by the enemy, and they have been weaponized, and they're being used against Americans, because they have got to get our population down as low as possible along with the world. And I want to bring to people's attention, if you haven't thought about this before, there is a reason that the CDC and the Georgia Guidestones are only miles apart from each other in Georgia. It's almost like they proclaimed what they're going to do, and then they went and turned the CDC against us.
Mm-hmm.
Without a doubt. So basically, it is as bad as we have always said. I never did the research. I brought to you the laws concerning preparedness, which I call the pandemic laws. And Michael and the miners have brought further elaborations on those things. But the point is, it's as bad as we've said. It is as criminal as we have said. There are laws that defend our rights that are being violated, and even a law enforcement officer that tries to tell you that you need a vax is part of this conspiracy.
Well, how about an employee at Pfizer? How about if you're an employee at Pfizer or Moderna? You know, are you also complicit in this crime? How far do we take it down?
Well, we have no obligation to follow illegal acts, even if you have signed a secrecy agreement with your organization.
Okay, so Douglas is pointing out to you, the technicians out there, the technology people, even the sales people at Pfizer that keep jamming this stuff down us, the doctors' offices, the nurses that are with the doctors, all of it. They are all complicit because you have now been notified that there are laws on the books that what you're doing is illegal and you can go to prison for life.
Every pharmaceutical company that calls this a vaccine is a conspirator. And if you are a doctor at the level working for them that understands that messenger RNA is not a vaccine, it is genetic modification, then you are a criminal and you need to go to jail for the rest of your life. That's what the law says.
Isn't that interesting how everyone in the public thinks if a person's a doctor, they must know? And what I'm hearing from doctors is most of these guys only spent one semester even studying immunology. So it's not like they, at this stage, probably the average American is more educated than most doctors graduating from medical school. And if they didn't practice immunology afterwards, their knowledge is very limited.
And what doctor isn't held responsible for going to the CDC site and looking at VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Event Registry System, and noticing that right now, 100% guaranteed, there have been about a little less than guaranteed, but some speculate it's much more. I'm not going to get into the speculation. But basically, over 18,000 people have died immediately and directly due to getting this fake vaccine. So what doctor then could recommend it to anybody without being a criminal?
So wait a minute. You're an employee at the local drugstore and you're injecting people. This applies to you too. Nobody should be working that job. Now, let's segue into what Mike has reported, because all of this is related. What is this really about? Why are we being genocided? Why is humanity being exterminated? And the reason is to cover up the crimes of the bankers. And it's been going on for a long time, and it begins with the silver rigging. And the problem is that these bankers cannot cover their massive shorts everywhere in our financial system. They can't pay your pension. The stock market is not worth anything. I mean, it is if you believe the paper. It's
when you say that, Tyler, I know that you're being hyperbolic, but what do you mean it's not worth anything? People can still go cash their stocks in.
They can now.
Cash. So when you say it's not worth anything in general?
Because it's based upon derivatives. I mean, how many of you out there have an actual stock certificate in your hand? In the old days, when you bought a stock, my first stock was I bought Save a Stock, and it was a little drugstore back in Florida, and you got a stock certificate. Do you get that? No. It's all smoke and mirrors. It's based on derivatives. What this really is a Ponzi scheme of global proportions. They can't pay things back to us, the people. They cannot pay your pension. If you're a teacher and you think you're going to retire, no, you're not. Your investments are all tied up in the stock market.
Are you saying that when you say they can't pay it back, that means if everybody tried to turn them in at once, they couldn't pay it back?
Well,
but if they're doing it in cycles like they have now, they're able to pretend like they have enough cash to cover everybody?
Well, they could, but let's just look at this. We're all in the boomer generation. And when I saw, this doesn't make sense. We're all going to contribute into the 401ks and the IRAs and all of that. But yet, at the back end, the government tells us when we have to sell our shares and our stock. Well, how's that going to work? Because you have all these boomers in selling their Apple stock. Well, that will drive the price down. Then I'm going to lose. I want to sell when I want to sell. The government has controlled this whole thing. When it crashes, they get to keep the assets. Look at the housing market right now. What will happen? BlackRock will come in and will buy these houses up cheap, like they did in 2008, and then they're going to lease them back. They get the revenue stream for that rent. but they took your asset, your equity that you put in there, and now you don't have a place to live and rented any apartment at exorbitant. But that's okay, because what they did is they made a whole class of American citizens homeless. And also, if you are in your home and you've been vaccinated and your children haven't, your children are going to be up for grabs by Child Protective Services to be used in trafficking. This is a horrific problem. And you people out there, if you're in a situation, if you have the ability to throw some kind of rock at this, even if it's a small one, you have to do it. Don't work at the drugstore and inject people. You're killing them. Do you understand the karma? Not to mention the laws you're breaking? And it doesn't matter if you don't know them, because eventually the truth, all of the truth is going to come out. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to look at why in the world is this really about hiding their financial crimes. They have been rigging silver forever. And the way they when they rig silver, or when they suppress the price of silver, I think this week I saw it at $22. Seriously? A beautiful engraved silver coin, $22. They do that to hide the fact that your dollar bill is worth nothing.
Well, what we're seeing from our investigations that are now centering around what was going on in the Civil War in 61, 62, 63 of 1800s. And what we're learning is that President Lincoln was trying to figure out a way to finance the war after they realized this was not going to be a quick war. So he went to the banks, including the foreign banks, and they were offering 25, 30% interest. And he said, I'm not doing that. So he created something called the greenback that had several versions to it. But these greenbacks were backed by silver and gold. And apparently during the war, they were very popular and were allowed the country to go through the war. And at the end of the war, there was a question as to whether that greenback would continue. And then Lincoln got into a huge fight with the bankers and the foreign banks. And cut a long story short, when he decided that he was going to continue this greenback note, which didn't involve the bankers, that's when he was assassinated. And so then we start looking at what the bankers were doing during that time and how over the next 20 years, the energy was growing to get rid of the silver backing for the dollar. Now, I don't pretend to be a financial expert, but I can see these documents and see that's what was going on. And by then, most of the mainstream media was already bought and paid for by the London bankers. That's real clear from the evidence. But what is also clear is that at the local and regional level, those newspapers were still independent. They were still free. And so what we see now is there was a lot of awareness growing from 60 to 90, 1860 to 1890, as to the scheme that was being attempted to where the British banks would come in and essentially run the American currency and decide the amount of volume of American currency and therefore control, as they said, their labor costs and the labor costs of their companies. So silver was clearly something they did not like. Now, we can't totally confirm this number yet, but there are articles that are otherwise very accurate that were saying that at that time they were valuing silver at 16 to 1 over gold.
Take a moment. Do you have that sentence that you found?
I can get it.
No, okay. So back then you would expect people to be grammatically correct when they write sentences, and that they would have a parallel structure would be important. And so the way that this is read is that they talk about gold to silver. Okay, wait just a second. All right, we're going to start here. Now, folks, if there was a little bump in the video, that's just because we have to get something correct. And Michael just ran down to the mines to speak to the miners to give him this document that we wanted you to be aware of.
Right. Okay, so this was an article written on February 21st of 1895, and it's titled The Bank Conspiracy. It's published in the Saturday Evening Kansas Commoner. in Wichita, Kansas. And it starts off the article, The Bank Conspiracy. Prior to 1861, gold and silver, coined at the ratio of 16-1, was the money of the country. As soon, however, as the first gun had been fired upon Fort Sumter, the metallic money, true to its history in all ages, fled. It was hid in wells, old fireplaces, cellars, and in Shylock's deposit vaults.
Okay,
That
hold
was
on.
their term back then, Shylock for crooked bankers.
Now just hold on, because when you were reading this to me, I'm going, whoa, whoa, whoa. So they're saying gold and silver. So they named that in the first part of the sentence, gold and silver.
Right.
And then they give you a ratio of 16-1. That
Right.
would mean 16 ounces of gold would equal 1 ounce of silver.
That's
And that's what a lot of people say that it should be, not the other way around. So I think we've been hoodwinked here in history. Now, you would have to, I know you have to get some corroborating documents to make sure that this is.
Well, I mean, that's so dramatic right now. That's flipped over what is happening right now, right?
I know, but Michael, 16-1. I just don't see that they would make that grammatical mistake back in
I don't either.
1895. Plus, it went out into a publication, so they had proofreaders. It's not like us making a little mistake and having to go correct it.
Right.
So
they were very accurate with these newspapers.
So that would be the truth of the matter. And then they went and hid it. And they made sure that we all out here thought gold is what you should get. And they suppressed silver. And they're still suppressing it. But what does JP Morgan Chase buy?
They buy every minted silver dollar, basically the Liberty dollar, that the Treasury releases each year instantaneously, and they have untold amounts of it in vaults directly across from all three of the places where they are minted. So they are buying up so much silver, it is absolutely ridiculous. They do not buy gold in that way.
Yes, okay, they're buying silver. They're not buying gold. They're storing silver because it has a value, a high value. And I want to say, and you smart guys can show us the path forward. Because this is war, JP Morgan Chase is part of the war and they are not on our side. We've got to go seize all of the silver from JP Morgan Chase and make that as like our new M1 money supply of precious metals.
Okay,
That's money from we the people.
Let me stop you.
They suppressed the prices. They bought it cheap. They screwed us again.
Here's the irony. You mentioned JP Morgan Chase. In this article, Salmon P. Chase was the Treasury Secretary under Abraham Lincoln. Here's a quote of him. He said, "My agency in procuring the passage of the National Banking Act was the greatest financial mistake of my life. It has built up a monopoly that affects every interest in the country. It should be repealed. But before this can be accomplished, the people will be arrayed on one side and the banks on the other in such a conflict as we have never seen in this country." That was in February 21st, 1895.
And every decade afterwards, it has been an operation of the banks to cover up this crime until the point that they can't have any of us alive because it's all going to be exposed. And Jamie Dimon, his neck is on the block, and everybody who's involved in this conspiracy of injecting biological weapons into the human bloodstream.
This whole controversy back in the 1860s to 1890s seems to have been triggered by something called the Hazard Circular. And there's a lot written about it, and there are a lot of affidavits that it was true and that did, in fact, occur. And I won't read the whole circular. It's only about 3 pages.
But I do have under
let me finish.
I have it. Okay, but I just let people know
hazard
that you have it.
circular. A hazard circular. This hazard circular basically described how the banks in America were to operate under instructions from London, the city of London. They actually specifically say Lombard Street in these articles, and that how they are going to counter Lincoln's greenbacks and eventually destroy it. And this was a private letter sent only to bankers. And so it took 20 years for some of those letters in the files of our banks to start making it out into the public. That's why we see a lot of discussion flaring up in the 1890s. Let me mention about hazard, but first I want to say that this was this issue of gold and silver was written the same year that the British South Africa Company was formed by Parliament, and Cecil Rhodes was sent down to be the governor of the Cape Colony, and he was also by then already a partner with the Rothschilds and M. Rothschild in the formation of the gold bank. Help me out, Douglas. I just had a brain freeze. De Beers. So there we see there's some obvious connection between the seizure of a great quantity of gold down in South Africa and the attempt to allow gold to continue to be the standard in the U.S. and the attack on silver during that same period.
To answer the question, J.P. Morgan and all the major banks hold over 1 billion of these coins. So why would they invest in silver, seeing that, they really poo-poo it? They make sure that they always raise and lower the price on key when they are told to, and all of their derivatives, basically keeping their bank afloat, have to do with buying and selling, supposedly, though none of it ever gets transferred from any bank to anyone. But they, of course, buy low and sell high. And then these banks also have audits that transfer this species, whether it's gold or silver, back and forth as their assets. It is what they use to prop up the derivative market, and whether it's the silver SLV or whether it's J.P. Morgan, Chase, any of the major banks, Barclays, they have tremendous holdings in silver. Why? Why would that be? Because all the way back to when you're speaking of with the greenbacks by Abraham Lincoln, who, yes, indeed, creating the greenbacks and backing them with species, gold and silver, probably got the bankers very upset. But then when he created the U.S. notes and created $400 million worth of those, which were backed by thin air, that's what upset the bankers. And they were, just like Benjamin Franklin said, we don't need to use gold and silver coins to pay our debts to foreign countries. That will deplete our currency. And if you're going to base the country's economy upon the amount of currency you have, it will sink the country. So he suggested, and I agree, all the way back then, that we should have land banks, banks that are based upon real estate, not upon manipulable gold and silver, which for most of its existence since banks came into existence, and particularly since the Bank of England back in the 1600s, it was Rothschilds who from their one office took a few calls from the major banks and determined the price of gold and silver each day. Hello? They determined it out of thin air. And when they were found to be criminal, and everyone who has ever been in charge of setting the gold and silver rates and the LIBOR rates, the interest rates between central banks and smaller banks, which then determines how much interest rates those banks are able to pay us if we put our money in them, that was then passed on to the people who own the New York Stock Exchange, ICE Incorporated. And then they were found to be corrupt. And then it got turned over to some international people who have only held it for 2 years. But silver manipulation, as Tyler was saying earlier, has had numerous court cases, and Morgan, J.P. Morgan, Chase, and Citibank and other banks were charged by the U.S. Treasury for basically manipulating silver prices. After a 4-year-long trial, they were getting ready to have their sentence because they were found guilty, and then they pull out of their pocket a letter signed by the head of the U.S. Treasury saying that they are allowed to manipulate silver. And so there is no doubt that even in a Ponzi scheme, people who are part of the Ponzi scheme up front, Yeah, they get their money back, and that's what you were asking about, Michael. You know, the stock market isn't worth nothing. They get their money back. But when the big call comes in and they have to, instead of like fractionalized banking, if they actually had to pay back all the people who put money in banks, the Ponzi scheme runner doesn't have the money.
Okay, but Chase knows, and all the big banks know, that we are in for the biggest financial crash ever in the history of humanity. They know this. So they've been hoarding silver. And then this is important that they were working with the U.S. Treasury, because it's going to make it easier for us to go in and seize all the silver that these big banks have been holding and been cheating the people of the value. Because let's think about this. We'll use round numbers. But if gold is going between $1,800 and $2,000 an ounce, that would mean it would take 16 of those ounces to equal 1 silver ounce. That's a huge amount of money. Now, we have told our folks for the longest time to protect your wealth right now as we go through this transition. Go out to your local coin shops, you know, to your jewelers, wherever you can, and start buying silver. And it's been hugely successful. In fact, the big weekend that we gave the big silver push, and that was prior to these Reddit sites that were doing it, it was unbelievable the amount of silver that was removed from the market. Well, the banks came in on Monday morning and they weren't going to have any of that. So they slammed the price down, and they have kept that brakes on that price ever since. But it doesn't take away the fact that the silver is highly valuable to them. So the best thing you can do is go out and take as much physical silver off the market as you can afford, because your fiat money isn't going to be worth anything very soon, at least in my opinion. Oh, and then we need to seize that money, those coins, from J.P. Morgan Chase, Bank of America. I think there was one other that was big in the silver market.
Citibank and one other New York bank.
Because those bankers conspired, and they have been conspiring since 1895. Dr. Fleming, for example.
1865.
Okay, 1865. But Douglas just walked you through how they've been conspiring to inject us all with a biological weapon to exterminate us. And now what Michael is showing, that since 1865, these bankers have been colluding with one another to suppress the real wealth of your nation and your household. And we've had enough of it.
Let me give you another little example of the character of the people that were attacking Abraham Lincoln. The person.
And don't forget John F. Kennedy too, because he was assassinated by these banker thugs as well for the similar reason. Sorry.
Yep. Well, this one goes back to 1865. It's called the Hazard Circular, and in all the verification of the document itself, there was not much discussion of who this Charles Hazard is. And I'm pretty proud to say that our team just discovered today who he is. And there's a company he created to enable English people to emigrate to Venezuela. And within a year, it was identified as a fraudulent organization and actually was disclosed. The situation got so bad that the governor of Jamaica wrote the parliament to complain about this guy, and that guy later became the governor of New Zealand, by the way. And he basically said that, like we now know was happening with the recruits of the Salvation Army, they were attracting destitute people to put up 1, 2, or 3 pounds to buy land down in Venezuela. And it was just a little plot of land, maybe like a fifth of an acre. And as it turns out, these destitute people went down there, and it was in the primordial jungle where they had never tilled it. The original trees were still there. These people were destitute, and they were told that your 2 or 3 pounds could have bought 2 or 3 square miles, not this little plot of land. And so this guy, within a year, actually had to come before the newspapers. The newspapers actually published his name. and the whole operation was discredited. But it was exactly what we saw. They were attracting poor English white people into these various places in the Caribbean, bringing them down there, and by the way, offering to pay their ticket and allowing them to even work the land for a fee. And so they put them in indentured servitude essentially right out of the chute. And it was not just this company. There were whole strings of companies advertising assistance to English people to emigrate to various colonies and get free land, a cow and an acre of land. So all of our research is now showing that this was a scheme of the banks themselves. And it was that guy who was the one that a few years earlier had taken these letters secretly to our banks all over the country and given them instructions on how they were to replace the greenback with bonds. They should sell bonds at an interest to replace the greenbacks, which were out there and being offered with no interest. So this has been a scheme of, I mean, look at these guys. They were trashing their own people, their own citizens. They didn't care. They could care less. So if they don't care about these people at all, what do they care about our citizenry or our governments or our health care? Nothing. These are evil people and have been for centuries.
And bankers are insider traders and traders on the market. And basically, you can see that the law that makes it possible, which has happened before, that the U.S. Congress can determine the value of a U.S. minted gold coin or silver coin. And this happened quite a few years ago, where they took the value and basically doubled the value overnight. I think it went from $29 to $50 for a gold coin. But they've never done that with silver. They haven't raised up the price of silver, but they have the right to. So if it is a minted U.S. coin, it is currency. But the value of that currency, no matter what is printed on the coin, even if it says it's a $50 gold coin or a dollar silver coin, that doesn't make any difference whatsoever. They can say what the value of that coin is worth, and that's what it's worth, because it is species currency. And they eventually, if they want to, could raise or lower the price of gold coins that are minted by the U.S. and raise or lower the price, the value of the silver coins.
It's going to take a while for the value in relationship to a dozen eggs is going to settle in. You know, it's easy to say that the money is worth X, but the fiat dollar is worth nothing. So if you do your simple math, let's just say gold is $1,800 an ounce. You times it by 16, and that is that the value of the silver would be $28,800. And all you have to do is go to your silver shop and buy it for $40 today. Move over Bitcoin. If you want to make money after the war is over, if you hold silver, you are going to be the richest guy in your neighborhood. So anyway, Douglas, can you wrap it up for us? What have we learned here today?
Well, first off, that it was a conspiracy of creating a bioweapon that's been going on with the support of the federal government for some time. And now we are focused on this species, the gold and silver that back our dollar. But remember, our 8,000 tons of gold basically is 4 times more than any other country in the world. And that's what supports the International Monetary Fund. When the time comes for us to revalue what the American dollar is worth, they say that it will be a basket of assets, gold, silver, Bitcoin, platinum, and a few other things. But who knows? It looks as if the U.S. Treasury just got permission a few weeks ago to create their own cryptocurrency. And when that happens, they will more than likely outlaw all other crypto coins because they cannot regulate it. And instead of printing up useless paper dollars, fiat currency that is not backed by anything, because we are no longer on the gold standard. And when Munchen went to Fort Knox, he only looked in one room and said, yep, all the gold's here. It's never been audited. We don't know if that gold is there. But when the time comes, it's not going to be probably gold and silver. That will be what we, the people, will be using for our currency, but they will try to give us digital cryptocurrency.
They're going to give us a $600 ping into our bank accounts And then we could have to spend it within a month. And then, the next month they'll give us another 600. That's why they want the banks to be able to turn over to the IRS any activities that we have over $600. Then they're going to, wait a minute, Michael, then they're going to wait for the rest of us to die off through starvation, turning off the heat in the cold parts of the United States during the winter. This is extermination. You got to wake up and see it for what it is. But when we're all dead, then they'll roll out their new currency or their monetary system based on silver, but it'll only be for the club of the rich guys that survive the extermination. And I personally can't wait to see what happens to Ivanka Trump 2 years from now. Was that a real shot you took, dear? Or was it saline and you were trying to fool all of us? Are you part of the conspiracy to genocide the world? I'm sorry, but all these loose hanging threads, we the people have long memories, and we're going to remember, and we're going to survive your genocide as well.
If I could inject a note of hope. I've seen this situation up close and personal in the former Soviet Union because I was taking gospel music groups into the former Soviet Union during the Brezhnev era. And I watched what happened when you had an official currency, the ruble, and you had the people on the street. The ruble wasn't working. The supply lines were poor. It was hard. It took like 8 years to order a car, a Lada. And so you were in these huge long waits. And so what happened? What do people do? They get creative, and they had a black market. And on paper, the black market was illegal, but everybody did it, including the officials. And so they had two currencies. They had the currencies for the officials that went and paid for luxury goods in dollar stores. They weren't ruble stores, they were dollar stores. So the dollar was the black market currency in the Soviet Union. And then of course that whole system collapsed. So the people carried on. They got creative. They figured out ways to get through their difficulties, and that country's still there. The people are still there. And, for good or ill, things have changed, and Brezhnev's not in power anymore. So I think that it's easy to think all hope is lost, but from an economy viewpoint, people get creative and they figure out a new economy. So maybe it is silver, maybe it is gold.
Yeah, that's why we always say, get yourself a bag of junk silver, dimes and quarters, because you can go down to the flea market or the farmer's market, and you can buy a bunch of turnips with a silver dime. People are always going to take that because it's of real value.
Yeah, and there was a lot of bartering going on as well, and as the system was collapsing. So there's always things we can do. We're talking at the macro level now and seeing the level of evil that's just been laid on our system generation after generation. And I think one of the things that I feel strongly about is we can't prop up this system. We cannot allow this system to be propped up. It is totally evil. It's gotten to the point now where we've aborted 65 million young babies, infants, and we're still doing it. Why? Anything that is the fruit of that kind of system cannot be good. We have no reason to desire for that system to continue. And so what you're saying, Betsy, is the people that created that realize that the jig is up, and they're going to try to race to stay ahead of the sheriff and knock us all off before that. I get that. That's a bigger task than one might think. So in the meantime, that doesn't preclude us doing what we need to do. And I really think this new meme going around saying, look, you don't have any obligation, whether you've signed an NDA, a secrecy agreement or not, you don't have any obligation to fulfill an illegal act. And in fact, you have an obligation to report it. So as a technology person, it doesn't take very many programmers to put a real monkey wrench into a mass surveillance system. One could do it. And I don't know the pharmaceutical world that well, but I would imagine the same is true there.
And then thank you for your good research on the Hazard Circular, because that demonstrates that the Pilgrim Society, who drive the bankers in Britain, in the city of London, were back then and still are today in control of manipulating the U.S. Federal Reserve and the central
Right.
banks. And then that got Abraham Lincoln killed, and it got John F. Kennedy killed. And today we need to realize that the federal government seems to not be our friend, and they are not looking out for our U.S. constitutional rights. They are, in fact, self-serving, aggrandizing grifters who basically are fallen prey to the 7 deadly sins. And we now need to do something about it. And no matter what way you can, as small as you might think it is, throw a gum in the works, throw a monkey wrench into the gears, but do whatever you can to stop this continuing federal control of our life initiated by the Pilgrim Society and the Brits.
And I know you're concluding, but here's the thing. We need to decentralize severely all over the world. Centralization is our enemy. They have rolled us up into there is a one centralized governing body for the whole world. No, we need to be broken up into a million pieces, a million different cultures, people. Go into your community, rebuild your community, elect good people to your state house. We don't need a president in Washington, D.C. to direct us as we move forward in our human evolution. So decentralization is a good thing.
Stop taking federal money.
Mm-hmm.
There's no reason to do that. We've just gotten so used to it now that we think it's the way it should be. No, it shouldn't be that.
Well, there is not going to be any money to be given in anyway when it all crashes. So, okay, be at peace, boys, and I'll see you next week sometime.
Amen.
And,
have a good weekend.
Okay, bye-bye.